The Fen Nightingale, 1879. I had been far and wide to draw a vast variety of birds. I was not one for colour, preferring to sketch hooked beaks in long, thick arches of ink, and shadow downy breasts with flicks of pencil. My travels had taken me to the Nile Valley to see the Egyptian goose with its brown and red markings, giving it a stitched-together appearance that made it look like a child's toy. Then, when I had seen amongst the archaeological sites the paintings of the sacred abyss, I found the bird at the mud flats of Kenya. I had drawn birds from the farthest unknown corners of the world, yet I barely knew what flew in the skies of my mother's county. Although half of my blood was Norfolk, I knew nothing of this place. I knew not the foods they ate, nor their strange dialect. I did not even have a tinge of their drawling accent. My father had taken me from England when I turned 5 to study birds with him. My sister was my mother's concern, while I was his only son and heir. I even had his name, Horace. I turned 20 a few months ago. Father had not written to wish me happy tidings. Such things did not concern him. We had parted ways when I was 17 after a disagreement over the mute swan. He had not responded to any of my communications since. How had mother coped with him? Or was it a case of out of sight, out of mind? I could not remember a time when they had been happy. Her simple country ways from being a vicar's daughter had aggravated father when once they had delighted him. The cart jolted, and I clung to my bundle even tighter. Rain dripped from my hair, pattering on to my spectacles. I could have travelled by train. I would have been drier, but I went cold all over if I even approached a station. It had been almost 4 years, yet the train crash in 1875 would never be forgotten. Sons, daughters, wives, husbands, and my mother and sister, all lost. My boat had been late, which meant I was not in time for the funeral. After all that, I did not even visit their graves. I reached as far as Roxham, then went back to Southeast Asia in search of the long-tailed nightjar. My mother and sister were still buried here, though. It was time I stopped being a coward. I was a man now, not a weeping child. The river ran alongside the road, resembling slithering snakes. Reeds and rushes shuddered and bowed, whipped by the winds. Even though I had read in books that the Broads were man-made, seeing them made me think differently. They were so long and deep, as if a mythical beast had scratched its claws across the land. A dragonfly, bright and glimmering blue, had braved the wet. It fluttered by, hunting for shelter. Then a tongue lashed out, and it was drawn into the dark cavern of a frog's mouth. The frog settled back where it hid in the mud. I shuddered, and thunder burst from the darkening clouds. In the end, I had to find shelter. I stopped off at a small inn called the March Bird, which was close to the water's edge. There were a few people within, the rain having chased them inside. Families sat together, enjoying their tea and someone else's fire. Young men sat at the counter, drinking and laughing, while a group of old men were close by the fireside. Their complaining that there would be more rain, storms, and misery to come seemed a continuous moan, as if they were the building's groaning foundations. I went to stand by the fire, where some coats and shawls had been draped, and took off my drenched coat to dry. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed one of the old men watching me. He was a squat man with white bushy eyebrows and a beard like splattering sea foam, and a thick tanned nose bursting out like a sand dune. His weather-scratched cheek curved from what I assumed was a crooked smile hidden beneath his beard. My lips quirked faintly, but I hurried to an empty table. The woman who served me was a few years older than myself. A mass of freckles arched on her cheeks in the same way as wings stretched out. Her plait, twisted into a bun, was an auburn hue, but the loose strands fluttering near her ear were paler, like soft feathers entangled in a nest. Her eyes were sharp and black, yet not as unnerving as how a bird eyed its prey, for they were almost engulfed by the light of her smile. "What would you like, sir?" Um, my name's Jemima." "Thank you, Jemima." I flushed when she grinned at me. "What would you suggest?" "Well, seeing how I've got some still warm from earlier, I'd say dressmaker tripe." She soon came with a plate. The tripe came in a little parcel, with a rich, dark gravy, boiled potatoes, and peas. I cut into the tripe, and the filling of herbs and breadcrumbs broke free. I took a hesitant bite, expecting it to be bitter, but it was somewhat sweet from the gravy. I fell upon the food. The heat from it seemed to ooze through me, chasing off the cold, making the heavy drenching I had got from the rain seem a mere droplet tumbling from a leaf. If I had gone to see mother or lived with her, might she have made this for me? We could have sat around the table and talked and laughed, passing the peas and hoarding the butter. I started when the chair next to me was pulled out. The old man I had noticed earlier sat down. "You're new," he said. It did not sound like a question, more an accusation. "Are you here to stay?" "I'm a traveller. I study birds." I believed there was a distant great-uncle near here from mother's side, yet I was reluctant to reveal it. Was I afraid that he would turn around and say we shared a cousin, that these lands had a further claim to me? He chuckled. "You'll have heard of the Fen Nightingale, then. It's a beautiful creature. You always know it is there on account of its song. Quite a powerful, striking voice, too." Pushing my plate aside, I pulled out my journal and found a fresh page. "Go on. What colour are its feathers?" Normally quite dark, perhaps even a mossy hue. The eyes are very wide." "A fen bird? There are only Broads around here. Does it fly over from the fens further inland?" "You could say that. Wherever there is marsh and water, there you will find it, but it scares easy." I wanted to hear more about this elusive bird. When Jemima passed by, I ordered drinks for myself and the old man. He drained his in one go, and demanded another. "He isn't bothering you, sir?" Jemima asked, after she returned for the fifth time. "Oh, no, he's telling me quite an interesting tale." After a while, the old man stumbled upstairs to bed. When Jemima came to collect my empty plate, without a single trace of gravy, she laughed. "You looked like you enjoyed yourself." She tugged at one of her loose curls then, and asked a little shyly, "You did like it?" "I've never eaten so well in all my years." "Would it be rude of me to ask you something?" She ploughed on. "I've not heard your accent before. Where are you from?" "A little from here and there," I told her, fiddling with my pencil. "I'd never been in one place for too long. My voice is a bit of a patchwork job." "You travel? You haven't been to Australia, have you? Is it true the Bunyip Beast is there?" Before I could answer, there was a shout from the kitchen. Her father was calling for her to come and help him, and she hurried back. I decided to book a room at the inn. There was no need to go to the village immediately. It was not as if anyone was waiting for me. There was only an empty cottage and two cold graves. I waited until night fell. With the people huddled up in bed, there was less chance of the birds being disturbed. The darkness meant peace, and that was what I preferred. Mindful of Jemima and her family, I was quiet as I could be as I slipped outside. I had borrowed a lantern earlier, but I kept the flame weak. Often in the past I had gone without such an aid, relying upon the pure, natural gaze of the moon. To do such a thing here would be foolish. Clouds would often come to pull a misty curtain over the moon, like a crafty old man using the smoke of his pipe to confuse travellers. It could be hard to tell land from water. A slightly soft, muddy bit of ground could slop down to pull you under the black, icy depths, and there awaited the unbreakable embrace of the weeds. Somewhere in the distance came the familiar hoot of an owl. Others shuddered at such a noise, but it comforted me. Droplets of rain pattered against my cold cheek, yet the furious spit had lessened into a dull drizzle. Each shallow breath I took seemed peppered with frost, still clinging to the winter we had only just left behind. I crouched by some rocks and bushes, quite near to the edge of the water. Mud squished beneath my boots, and grass clung to the hem of my coat. Being out here felt familiar. I had never sat by this stretch of broad before, but as I stared at the bobbing scabs of moss, a picture formed. Elsewhere, when I was a boy, I had crouched near the edge and tried my hand at babbing, wrapping a baited line around my finger and dipping it in. Mother had been there, though I strained my mind so hard that I feared it might set alight. She was a pale, translucent figure, more a smear of dark hair and a pale blue shawl, like night creeping over day. My baby sister clung to her neck. "You won't be catching any eels, Horace," she'd called, a whispering breeze that could be mistaken for a voice. "All that's here are pollywiggles." As quickly as the memory came, it went, chased off by the chill alongside my warmth. Perhaps it was a dream I had had years ago, or something I'd made up. I hugged myself tighter. This had been their home. It was the closest I had ever felt to them. Would more of these memories arise if I stayed? I watched and waited. Rain dribbled down my hat, making a constant slithering drumbeat echo in my skull. Once, when I saw a dark shadow glide across the water, I slowly raised my lantern, heart leaping in excitement, only to discover it to be an ordinary mallard. I held my breath and listened, certain that I might hear the faint, beautiful warble of the Fen Nightingale. I heard and saw nothing to give me hope. All that punctured the night air was the gurgling croak of frogs. I returned to the March bird just as the moon was setting. I was cold, wet, and exhausted, exactly as I had been when I'd first arrived. I could have left upon the morning, yet I promised myself one more night to find a trace of this bird. "You've been here for a week, sir," Jemima said as she set down my breakfast of scrambled eggs and toasted Yarmouth herrings, which she called toasters. "What are you looking for?" "A bird," I told her, before setting upon my food. "Which one? King Harry Redcap?" "What's that? A goldfinch?" "No, it is the Fen Nightingale." She bit her lip. "Why don't I come out with you tonight? You'll need someone who knows what they look like." Jemima was coming with me, whether I wanted her to or not. Upon nightfall, Jemima and I crept outside. "I hope that no flittermouse," she paused and chuckled. "I mean a bat, doesn't fly at us." The night went on just as any other night. The shadows tricked us into thinking creatures lurked, crows swooped overhead, and every single other animal save for the Fen Nightingale called out. The only difference was the soft whisper of Jemima's voice. She talked of her father and mother and her aunt and cousins. She told of their joys and woes, as though I were her closest friend. Perhaps it was her way with everyone, even a stranger such as I. Normally, I worked in silence. Others in my profession had been known to shush anyone nearby, and my father once threatened to glue my lips together with treacle. Birds were easily frightened. Yet I did not mind Jemima's chatter. It comforted me. Jemima took in a deep breath, and the next exhale held the faint trickle of laughter. Is this what you do when you travel? I know it is a little unexciting, I murmured. I love it. She covered her mouth and spoke more quietly. One day I'm going to leave and discover every single one of the world's secrets. I wonder, why'd you come here when you could be somewhere warm and not drowning in mud and rain? My mother and sister are buried a few miles from here. I pursed my lips. Why had I told her that? Yet, as she watched me, like a heron hidden amongst rushes, ready to snap its beak to pierce a slithering eel, my tongue loosened. Was there something within me, trapped in delicate eggshell, wanting to erupt and shake itself free? Have you been to see 'em? She made it sound as if they were at home, awaiting me. If only that were true. I shook my head. Why not? We were not close, I hesitantly admitted. I am afraid that if I go there, I will feel nothing. I sighed. No, that isn't right. Then what is it? I will be none, yet full of guilt. I should have written and visited them more, but I was too busy with my work. You were doing something you loved. I'm sure they would have understood. What does it matter if, when you finally get home, the place is like a foreign land and all who you love are gone? Her hand was on my shoulder. It was heavy and her warmth seeped through. I swallowed. My eyes felt wet, but it was only the sharp wind's nip causing them to weep. Nothing else. Promise me you will visit their graves once you find the Fen Nightingale, she said. I will. She leaned over and softly kissed my cheek. Follow me. Jemima led me by the hand further along the bank, towards one of the muddy slopes. I squeezed her hand. It felt right, as if we had always done this. You know nothing of our dialect, do you? She said. I suppose a fen nightingale is our little joke, a trick to fool those not from the county. You won't be finding one of these up in the sky. We knelt by some rushes, and she gently pulled them aside. There, squatting in the mud, with river weeds clinging to its murky, spotted back, was a frog. Its yellow eyes, like droplets of oozing butter, swiveled to glance at us. Startled, its frothy croak stopped midway. With a great leap, the frog flung itself into the water, splashing us. That, sir, is your fen nightingale. An unnatural cry, mossy coat, and a lover of all things muddy. I truly had been had. Rather than a cry of frustration, a snort escaped from me. I wiped at the corners of my eyes, not caring that I was smearing goodness knew what onto my cheeks. These people and their strange words were a funny sort, but they were my people as well. And now I had a promise to keep. Look, Horace, Jemima hissed. An Indian peafowl. She handed me her field glasses. I could see a male and female picking about for food amongst the temple ruins. The male had such a stunning plumage. The bright, colourful tail feathers were spread out for its courtship ritual. Give it a few minutes, and we'll try getting closer, I said. Our sketchbook was tucked underneath my arm. Alongside our recent sketches there were drawings of wood sprites, daffy-dows, and barley birds, the Norfolk words for the woodpecker, baby dove, and the true nightingale. They were my words as well. I was starting to pick up the dialect, listening to Jemima, and there was a slight drawl in my voice. Within my harsher, duller ink lines, colours burst. Jemima's watercolours were vibrant reds and yellows for birds in flight, and delicate pinks and blues for when they nested. Incomplete when apart, but beautiful and whole when together.